With Ekaterina, we know each other for quite some time already, artistically and personally, and we actually have studios in the same district of Vienna, so we often come in contact with each other's work. And over the years, I have noticed, through seeing each other's exhibitions, that we have quite a few topics in common. And this was an interesting possibility to bring it together. Me coming from mainly sculpture direction, I was predominantly with objects. Ekaterina works often with graphic works and painting, as well as installations and objects. And then there are some certain topics that came together in this exhibition. We both have a shared interest in space and using space as a communication device with the audience. So we both tend to create an interpretive space within an exhibition for something, an opportunity for the viewer to look through and use the artworks as some sort of visual clues, to interpret them, to put them together in different interpretive combinations depending on their own experience, on the past experience, on using the system of visual symbols they're familiar with to create their own meaning. So I think that was one of the starting points of the collaboration. At the same time, in this exhibition, what happened, which we noticed when we were building it up, what comes up quite strongly is, on one side, interest in scale, and the other side, there is a lot about two-dimensional and three-dimensional qualities of materials, at the same time flatness and object quality, which you would see in the artworks very often, that the paintings are also objects, but the paper is also not just the paper, but works also has a physical presence in the show. The materials imitate each other. Some things look light, but they're actually heavy, and the other way around. So it's also something you get confronted with as a viewer, a bit of this illusion of materials, and somehow it creates this poetic, almost magical quality to the works. At the same time, there is this question of scale. A lot of the prints that you can see, they're actually very enlarged, so it's a scanning of very small stones, from pebbles from the beach, and I think with the scaling you lose a little bit the connection to what the object is, so it starts to become something, it loses at the same time the flattening effect tricks you into thinking, okay, maybe that's not what I think it is, and then it almost becomes like this oversized, it starts to look like, almost like a galaxy. There is a sort of, you know, this shift in interpretation here. And at the same, of course, with the color, it was something we haven't really planned necessarily, but there is a very nice color dialogue too, of this very deep black, like a black that's beyond black, this very heavy matte quality of Ekaterina's graphic works, and at the same time with the branches, which are actually covered in black velvet fabric. So there is this sort of, you know, the ultimate black. It has again this kind of haptic, almost almost like a black hole to get lost in a way. It becomes very very cosmic.
For me, a do exhibition is always a chance to focus on some certain aspects of the work. So the selection of the works which I show here was done specially for this project. I exhibit like 3 different kinds of bodies of works. These are the paintings which are in a circle form and which are showing something which looks like a flame, but it shouldn't be, but I think it's right like that. Then I have a series of graphic works which are kind of opposite to their paintings, and I exhibit one small object which is in between drawing, painting and a sculpture. And what I always try to do is to question the work by itself through editing another work. So they are a kind of contrast, and it's a very different kind of poetry which is behind each of the bodies of works, but I think that in a combination there a certain tension arises.
I've used mostly found materials or found imagery. A lot of it is appropriated pieces. So for me, it's not really ready-mades as such, but a certain translation from things that are already existing into a new kind of visual dimension or interpretive dimension. So I would say I never really sketch. All my process is basically, I kind of designed it in my head, because then I work directly with materials. At the same time, I collect a lot of visual information, images, objects, all kinds of things that interest me in one way or another. I often carry around an idea for, a couple of years until I find what I can possibly do with it. I think this. Sometimes it could be a novel, it could be a game, it could be a kind of pop culture phenomenon. Very often there are things that I just find fascinating for one reason or another, and they don't have a material quality to them at all. But for me, the interesting point is, how do I translate it into something into the sculptural space, which something is completely nothing to do with sculpture. It has no haptic, no material quality to it.
In my work, I'm quite conscious about the forms and about their meanings and symbolical meanings. And also in the exhibition here, there are some references to that, and especially in these flame paintings. And I have a lot of sketchbooks, which I'm looking through all the time. And if I see an interesting drawing or something what touches me in my own sketchbook, I redraw it again. And I have another kind of technique. I have 15 minutes drawings when I'm in my studio and I start to work. I do drawings according to time, so it's not about the result of the drawing, it's just about the technique, it's about the conscious looking at things and about coming to some ideas. And that's how I came to these flame forms, because I saw something in my studio which reminds me of that. And for me it has a very open but very deep connotations. It could be an eternal fire, which you might easily find on some monuments, or it might be a flame of the Liberty statue. It's not something definite, but it could have these eternal meanings. I'm asked quite often, why do I use exactly this pattern and not another one, and not more patterns. So the first thing, I use mostly just one, because I'm not a pattern designer, I'm a painter. So, and for me it doesn't make sense to use more to express the same. And I really like exactly this one, because it expresses perfectly, on the one hand, the idea of the flatness, because I have total equal quality to a horizontal line and to a vertical line. And this equality, it seems to be a perfect democratic pattern, I would say. How I was looking for something what could express our social condition or ideal social condition in an abstract way, and then I came to this kind of pattern and also to the shapes. So I work mostly with a square format when I work with painting, and in this case it's a circle, which is has no preferences to any size or any direction. So that's why I use these. And in the graphic works, it's a total opposite. So I have a very clear format, and that's a kind of a strategy which I use. I have a very straight rules which I follow and which I break. So the rules are there to be broken at the same time.
The question of haptic quality of objects is a very interesting question for me, because I think as a, let's say, the so-called post-digital generation, we end up doing a lot of things which are digital, which are not haptic, which is the opposite of haptic. So this kind of quality of material gets somehow lost, and I think there is also for me a tendency to actually do work very, how to say, very directly with materials, because I really enjoy the making process, which is sort of a continuation of my idea. A lot of the scaling of the object is also to do with me working on them. So often it's something I can hold or pick up, and I think the scaling has something to do also with my own height and my own positioning. So it's not something I do consciously, but I often encounter it as well.
I think that in both of our works, our own body is quite important, and me and Nika were totally opposite in our body scales. And I think it's also, it's not just about forms, it's also about, it's not about minimalism, it's also how subjective and personal body experiences take forms and take shapes within the artwork. And it sounds probably funny, but I think it has also a deeper meaning. And here we tried to break the scale of the space itself, exhibiting works of different scales. Some works are very small, some works are probably even oversized, so that you as a viewer lose a sense of the space, so that you don't know how big is the space in real, and to what kind of objects the exhibited objects really refer to.
On the other hand, there is of course this materiality to the objects. Of course, yes, it's something that you're not allowed to touch in the exhibition context. This is an interesting question. At the same time, there is this whole idea of sculpture. When we talk about sculpture nowadays, we mostly talk about documentation, because we rarely encounter a real object. Most of the time we see a photo in a catalog or online, and the tendency to actually, the need to see a real object is somehow disappearing. So you have this, you know, this trickery a bit of this 3 dimensions, you know, because we talk about a photograph, but we mean the sculpture. So it's not actually a sculpture, it's a photo of a sculpture. So I think this kind of this lack of interaction is probably part of this as well. It has something very seductive about it too. I think for me, as I said, it has a bit of a performative quality too. So I'm working on them physically, and at the same time, there's something that you tend to want to experience, but it's something that there is a bit of a border too. Also, how the viewer would move through the space also is changed through the positioning of the works, because some of them are lying just across the floor. So of course you have to either step over them or to move around them. Some artworks are hanging on a very high level, some artworks are very low, so you would have to bend down. There's a lot of this performative participation of the viewer as well.